Okay, so in this video, we're looking at another 5 and L hand, and in this hand, I'm going to be talking about semi-bluffing and bluffing. Um, and in this hand, I want to demonstrate some good spots to look for when you're looking to semi-bluff and bluff, and also talk about the math behind it. So let's take a look. So we have Queen 10 off in the small blind. It folds around to an 83-8, an insanely weak passive fish on the button that's going to be limping an insanely wide range. So we obviously want to ISO raise. And against somebody that's limping an 83% range, if they're not folding a lot to our ISO raises, then we can either we can increase the sizing of our ISO raising, or we can even loosen up our value range for ISO raising. So we ISO raise, the big blind folds, and he calls, which is a great thing. The flop is not the best flop in the world. However, we do have some good backdoor equity. So let's think about good turn cards. An 8 is a good turn card that allows us to double barrel. A 10, of course, a queen, of course, and a jack as well, which gives us an open-ended straight draw. So a lot of good turn cards that allow us to double barrel. Now, in terms of our opponent, do we expect him to fold that much? Probably not. If we look at his fold versus a flop c-bet, it's only 33% of the time. However, we only have a sample size of 12 hands, so I'm not going to take too much weight from that stat because the sample size is just too small. It's 2 out of 6 times. That does tell me he's not folding that often, but he is going to fold roughly 1 out of 3 times. So when I do semi-bluff here, and we'll look at the sizing, and based upon the sizing, it'll tell you how often it needs to work. But I think this is a fine spot to semi-bluff here for a couple of reasons. Because we can make the best hand on the turn, or we can make a really good draw on the turn and make the best hand by the river. And if we have an opponent that's not folding that much, then we can extract a lot of value. So I bet a half pot size bet, and a half pot size bet only needs to work around 33% of the time. So in regards to if he calls or if he doesn't call, for us it doesn't matter, because based upon how often he's folding, this is actually a perfect sizing for our semi-bluff, because it's going to be a profitable sizing. And actually, let me just pull my table in from my book so you can see it. For those of you that don't have my book, I do have my bluff break-even tables, and the way that it works is that we have risk to reward ratios, and so we're risking a certain amount to win a certain amount. When we're bluffing a half pot size bet, I just put examples in here of a $100 pot. If we bet half the pot, it's 2 to the 1 reward to risk ratio, so it only needs to work 33% of the time. So at this point, we're indifferent to if he calls or doesn't, because regardless if he calls or doesn't, if we only bet a half pot size bet here and he's only folding 33% of the time, it's going to be break even for us. So I think it's a perfectly fine sizing to bet here, regardless if he calls and if he doesn't. Now, when he calls, we can't automatically assume he has a really strong hand, because he doesn't fold to that many c-bets. So he could have a 6 or an 8 for a gut shot straight draw. If we're really unlucky, he could actually have flopped the straight, but it's highly unlikely because his range is so wide. He could have a pair of 9s, a pair of 5s, a pair of 7s, an underpair such as deuces, 3s, 4s, and 5s. He could potentially even have pocket 6s or pocket 8s because he's only raising a really strong range. And he could just be really sticky. He could be a calling station and have like a king high, queen high, an ace high, just some random overcards that that he just doesn't want to give up on the flop. So his range is super wide, but our bet sizing makes it to the point where we're indifferent if he calls or if he folds, because it's going to be break even long term versus how often he folds. So the turn card is probably one of the worst turn cards we could expect for. Out of all those cards that we could double barrel on, an 8, a 10, a jack, a queen, all those cards, none of them come. And we could even probably double barrel on an ace as well, because we represent a lot of strength with our pre-flop raise and our c-bet on the flop. So he could be afraid of an ace, he could be afraid of a king. So probably almost any Broadway card is going to be good for us to double barrel. But the 2 of hearts, anything below a 9 is bad for us. So at this point, I think we need to check. And my stat here tells me he's not folding to any turn c-bets when he calls a flop c-bet. So we check, and he checks back. Now, when he checks back, it tells me that his hand isn't strong. So we're going to rule out pocket 9s, probably pocket 8s, maybe even pocket 6s and 8s, both of those combined, because maybe he's going to bet the turn with a gutter straight draw. So we can safely assume maybe he just has an ace high, maybe he has a king high, maybe he has a queen high, Maybe he has a pair of fives, a pair of sevens, or an under pair such as deuces, threes, fours, something just that's not that strong that he's not really willing to put money in the pot to on the turn. So that tells us that he has a lot of weakness in his range, and he doesn't want to invest money on the turn. What that does is when the river card comes, the king of spades, I think this is a perfect spot for us to take a river bluff line, and this is for a couple of reasons. Number two, we don't even beat a pair of deuces, and we can't beat ace high. Now, if he has, a king high and he backs into a pair of kings, well, that's unfortunate for us. However, we put him on weakness when he checks back the turn. We don't think we have much showdown value because we think he has a weak pair or potentially ace high. So we need to take a stab on it. Now, in terms of the sizing, I think we need to go a bit larger because he is a bit of a calling station. So I do opt for roughly around 2/3, 3/4 pot size bet. And going back to that table, again, bluffs don't need to work that often. So my sizing is around 3/4, maybe a little less. So it needs to work in the low 40 percentile range. So it doesn't need to work that often. If he folds around 40% of the time, a little more than half the time, then it's going to be profitable for us. And so we bet and he folds as expected. So, what I wanted to show you with this hand is just to look for profitable spots to, number one, semi-bluff when you have good equity and you are demonstrating a strong range versus a weak opponent like this opponent. And then when they show weakness on the river, then take a stab at it if you don't have any showdown value. And with the queen high, I didn't have any showdown value, so I felt that I needed to bet this river to win this pot. I felt if I checked it back, then he's probably going to show up with some sort of weak pair or an ace high, and I'm going to let him have the 89 cents in the pot, which I don't want to do. So that's going to conclude this hand. I guess we did do a bit of math that I think was important to cover, and that's bluffing and bluff even break even points, which is this table I'll bring over one more time. So if your opponent is folding around this percentile, let's say that they're folding 50% to river bets, then if you bet a pot size bet, then you make them indifferent to calling. It's an indifference point. So if they call or if they fold, it doesn't matter to you because based upon your bet sizing, it only needs to work at the amount where we would expect them to fold. And so we expect to be break even. And so that's, a little bit of theory, but I'm not going to get too much into it. If you have any questions about this hand, let me know. And if not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.